Hi, Austin. Oh my gosh.
Hey.
Thank you so much for coming on. I have kind of been watching you. I've been
Oh,
stalking
thank.
you on the internet for a while. No,
Well, the way we put information out there, it's easy to stalk us, right?
right. I mean, and in a good way. Like
Yeah.
Jivamukti, New Jersey was always coming up.
Oh,
And
thank you.
yeah,
Thank
was
you.
really nice. So I've always kind of known about you guys and about you, and we'll get into the shift and new direction of where things are headed now,
Yeah.
and the world is in a whole new transition phase anyway, so I guess the timing is right. But it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm so
Thank you for
grateful that
having
you
me.
took the time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love the podcast. I think that what you're doing is really important, and having really important discussions and discussions that are happening around yoga and the vegan movement. Which let's be honest with, without yoga, the vegan movement in America would be way behind. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean there is a certain element of that for sure, although still so small, too small in the yoga community, but things are changing.
Things are changing, but I'm actually hopeful with a lot of the things, with just a couple of shifts. The Game Changer movie, I think, was a big shift of
Yep.
getting people to notice and think about what they were putting into their bodies, even if it wasn't based on animal compassion. And it's still everything, every little thing counts, because everything that we do is in the end going to help the animals. So I'm one of those guys. I don't care if you do it because your health, or you do it because you want to look better, or you want to clear up your skin, or you're doing it for spiritual reasons. Whatever you want to do it, whatever reason to get you to start rethinking your diet. um, I will support you.
Yeah, I agree because I mean it was something we talked to briefly off the air was just different types of yoga trainings, right? Same thing
Yeah.
with veganism. So just to bring the listeners up to speed, we were speaking about, where I had done my initial training, and I had said my 200 hour was just kind of, the run of the mill kind of 200 hour, but you had brought up this point that everybody needs to, everybody has a place where they need to start approaching yoga. So it's
Yes.
important that we have all these different types of yoga trainings, and they're going to be focused differently. Some you will have more of a spiritual element, but that's the same thing with veganism. Like, however,
Absolutely.
you can catch, get that glimpse of somebody to listen, whatever that focus is.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that, like, one of the things that food is very personal. People have, they identify it with culture, they identify it with taste, they identify it with quality of life. And so when you bring yoga into it and you start talking to people about what they eat within the yoga community, you're bringing in, especially if it's a spiritual type of yoga where you're talking about consciousness and raising consciousness and becoming aware of the actions and the repercussions of actions, and how one action triggers a whole series of actions.
Right.
And seeing both past and present and future all at the same time. Yoga allows you to do that. Then you get into an idea of diet and changing diet, because you can see how what you're, the system that you're involved in, and how
Absolutely.
that and how that a system is playing out in politics, how it's playing out economically, how it's playing out in structures affecting other beings. So it's very complicated. It's
Yeah.
very complicated.
And I, I think it's a good entry point right there. Just in the way that you talked about how the veganism then spills over into politics. It spills over into the economy. It spills over into these bigger areas that, to me, is part of that Jivamukti training that you had embraced and
Yes.
you had shared as a Jivamukti studio, Jivamukti, New Jersey, for when did you open?
We were 7 years,
7.
almost to the day. Almost because we switched over October the 1st to the new brand Urban Sadhu,
Okay.
and I guess we signed the lease contract in 2013 or 2012, and then there was a year build out. So it was almost 7 years to the day.
Wow. Yeah, and so important and so interesting to just keep watching how yoga, like everything else, continues to evolve and change and shift.
Yes.
And it's kind of it's interesting to see from an outsider because while I've read Sharon Gannon's, Yoga and Veganism, which is a beautiful book, and I had the pleasure of at least doing a blog interview with her a while back
Yeah.
on her Magic 10 and Beyond. Um, I've been watching Jivamukti and learning about Jivamukti really from other yogis and not so much as a firsthand experience other than reading the books and listening to
Yes.
it that way. I had gone to a few, and not a lot of classes in the city in New York when I was with my daughter. Usually when I would take her for a dance, she'd have NYCDA, which is like a convention competition,
Right.
like this just crazy thing. So I would be in the city for 5 days because it's just too much of a commute to do those hours and go back and forth that we wanted to do. Um, and that's when I would just kind of leave her, to do whatever. She's old enough. And I'd seen her dance enough times. And then I would just go off and I
Yeah.
would go experience Jivamukti. But I never, because I was unaware that they had sold the brand 3 years ago. So I
Yes.
wasn't privy to really any of this stuff other than going to the flagship yoga studio in the city that had the cafe
Right.
attached to it and experiencing it that way. Although I will say the last time that I went was it seemed to kind of, some of the magic seemed to be going away. But you never know. You show up, different people are there. There's always reasons why things can change. But I was completely unaware of
Right.
anything that had gone on,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
which is interesting because I've talked to quite a few of Jivamukti teachers, but that just wasn't something we were talking about. So I
Right.
didn't know it was sold. So, you know, we're going to get into this idea of yoga as a business and
Yeah.
also just kind of how to survive as a studio now in mid-COVID and just ways that we can take those beautiful teachings. I think something that I struggle with, or I'm not a follower by nature. Like
Hmm.
I will listen to a teacher, I will follow a teacher for a while, but it is always my nature after a while of going one direction to pivot. That's just the
Right.
way I'm wired.
Right.
And so for me, it's always collecting this wisdom without necessarily saying everything that someone talks about is the end all be all of a spiritual path or the way to do something. And it can be something spiritual, it can be something with food, it doesn't really matter. So
Yeah.
I guess, what I'd like to start off is how did you, what was your first experience with yoga? At what
Mm.
point did you start to learn from Jivamukti and become a teacher and an advanced teacher? Kind of what was that path? And then
Right.
how has both the selling of the studio and the pandemic kind of shifted and pivoted your place to where you are now?
Where we are now.
It's a long
So,
question.
well, I mean, my background's kind of interesting. I did not practice my first yoga class till I was 43 years old. That was the first time I took a yoga class. I came to New York. I grew up in rural Alabama. I went to school at North Carolina School of the Arts in costume design. I came to New York to do my master's work at Tisch University, at New York University, Tisch, and I got a master's degree in set and costume design. And then for 35 years, even while I was in college, I worked professionally in the American theater.
Fun.
And I did everything from Broadway shows to operas to cruise ship design to theme park design to, commercials, a little bit of movies. I wasn't really queer for the whole movie scheduling thing. I hated that getting up at 5 a.m. thing.
Yeah, that works.
That wasn't for me. And you came from LA. I never went out to LA, and I never fell in love with LA. So it was also, the movies were always a little bit like, if you want to be in movies, you have to go to LA. And I have not driven a car in 30 years. So I loved New York because you did not have to drive.
Right.
So I was, and I grew up in rural Alabama where I drove everywhere, and I couldn't wait to give up a car. When I moved up here, I was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm getting rid of this massive amount of metal. So I spent, a lot of time just working in New York. I was a workaholic. At 42 years old, I kind of had a little bit of identity crisis. I was unhappy. There was no reason why I should really have been unhappy with my career. The only thing, it just wasn't going anywhere. I had hit a glass ceiling, right, and that's where I was. And I was seeing a really terrific therapist at the time, and she turned me on to some meditations. And she realized that I had a lot of knowledge about Eastern philosophy and Eastern spirituality. And she was, she kind of said, oh, you should start listening to Ram Dass, and you should start listening to this person. And then she was like, maybe you should take a yoga class. And she actually suggested Jivamukti. And so, and because she was kind of a hardcore kind of gal. And I went to my first Jivamukti class, and I remember laying in Shavasana sobbing. How many of us have that same story? You do this very intense physical class, and then you end up in tears. And
you don't know why. What the hell happened?
What just happened? Yeah. And it was with the first class I took was with a wonderful teacher named Susan Steiner, who's still one of my dearest friends and works at the studio with us. And afterwards I said, that was amazing. That was my first yoga class ever. And she looked at me, she said, you're lying. She's like, you knew where you were going. How was that your first class? And I said, I don't know. So I started practicing with her pretty much every day. And at that time, I guess that must have been somewhere around like September, October, because by January, I said, oh, I think maybe I told her, I said, maybe I should do a teacher training so I kind of can jumpstart my yoga practice. Like, I had no interest in teaching. I thought it was going to be flogging sequins,
Right.
And she said, oh, well, if you do a teacher training, you have to do Jivamukti. You can't do anything else. And I was like, oh, okay. So now this is where it gets a little weird. So she says to me, she said, let's go to Jivamukti, the tribe, which they always had in New York City. Sharon, Gannon, and David Life would teach. And she said, let's buy tickets. And she said, you can meet the founders. And I said, oh, okay. And I should also kind of I should have started out kind of saying that prior to doing yoga, I was a constant gym bunny. If I was not in a costume shop, I was at the gym lifting weights.
Okay.
And so I was my father was a football coach, so I was very physical, very athletic. And I used to have an office on Bleecker and Broadway in New York City. And around the corner was a Crunch, right?
Right.
So we went to the St. George Ballroom for the first tribe gathering, and sitting on the stage was Sharon Gannon. And Susan looked at me and she said, "That's Sharon Gannon, the founder." And I looked up at her and I said, "I know her." And Susan said, "How do you know her?" I said, "Well, she used to teach yoga at Crunch Fitness, where I used to go to a gym." I said, "I would go to stretch in the yoga room and she would come in and I would sit and talk to her before her class." So I was introduced after the class to Sharon, and I kind of reminded Sharon. I said, "Do you remember us talking?" And she was kind of, and so I kind of felt like that was some kind of sign that, like, oh, I should stay with this method of yoga. So I never really thought about veganism. And while I was taking classes in New Jersey with Susan, she would mention things, but it was just not it was at a studio where the environment wasn't conducive for her to give like a hardcore lecture about, animals have feelings, animals have souls, animals, right. You need to be thinking more about your actions. It wasn't that kind of environment. And of course, at this first tribe, it was like Sharon being Sharon, and Sharon, there's no apologies there about how she feels about animal activism and veganism. And it was just really an eye-opener for me. And I really had to start thinking about, how I was living my life. I wasn't really a heavy meat eater. I have to say, I did love cheese and dairy. I think that's a lot of people get hooked on that because It's like crack cocaine. However, I was a big participant in the New York leather community. So I was kind of a known entity. And, I had to, for me, that was a really deep time spent thinking about animals and my use of animal products for sexual pleasure. Oh, and it was heavy. It was, and I'm very honest about it because I think there are probably a lot of people who have to go through that issue, and it's not talked about a lot.
No.
Because it's very tabooed,
Right.
And so I decided I would do the Jivamukti Teacher Training, which was going to be that April at Omega. It was one of the last few teacher trainings that David Life and Sharon Gannon were at for the whole time. And before I went, I looked at my partner, who Bob and I are still together, and I said, "I'm giving up the fetish. I'm giving up our fetish life. And I understand if you can't go down this road with me." I said, "But, if you would like to go, we can change our lives together." And he decided to stay. So we kind of gave up a whole identification within a subculture of New York City. And we became vegan, and I did the teacher training. I didn't think I was going to teach. And because Jivamukti was, at that point, the magic was still there, IQ. And I walked out of teacher training, and a week later, I was called to and offered jobs. They were like, "We know you. You just did the training. We have these 3 spots on the schedule." And I'm like, "But I've never taught a day in my life." And they're like, "You'll be great. We know it." Right. So I started teaching immediately. And within a year of teaching, I decided I would get out of the theater and leave the theater. And mainly because it was huge. And so I've weaned myself out of the entertainment industry over the last 7 years. Right. I did have some big clients that I didn't let go of immediately because they were very lucrative. Yeah. But one of the reasons why I got out of entertainment is because of the conflict with veganism. I mean, that's another interesting concept for another talk for another day, is the idea of textiles.
Right.
Very difficult subject, very, very difficult.
Yeah.
So I did the 800-hour teacher training at Jivamukti, New York City. And in the middle of that, I thought, well, I'll open up a small studio and start teaching yoga on my own. And Sharon offered me the name.
Cool.
And I came home and I told Bob, I said, Sharon wants our studio to be Jivamukti. He went, no! And then he slept on it, and he got up the next morning. He said, you know, they're offering this to us. We should do this.
Right.
This will be very special. So, and that's kind of the short, quick story of how I became an advanced certified Jivamukti yoga teacher and owning a Jivamukti Yoga studio.
Yeah, and extending the magic.
Yeah. And it was an interesting time to open. When the month we opened was the month that the sex scandal broke out in the paper.
Right.
So what I did is I just kind of distance. I mean, even though we're literally right across the river, Hudson River, from New York City,
right,
it's kind of like being somewhere else. I just didn't acknowledge what was happening with, you know, because I couldn't. I mean, we had just opened our doors a month earlier.
Right. And you know, I know a little bit about what happened. It never really traveled to. It didn't cross out of Jivamukti necessarily, like things are doing now.
Yes, and I think part of that was because the people who were involved were employees.
Right.
They were not the founders.
Yeah.
A lot of the conversation we're having about lineages and problems within lineages is with founders. Right. And this was employees behaving badly,
right,
and the founders not responding well to employees.
Right. And that's different.
Very different. It's very different.
Yeah, but still hard, because, you know, that's something I've talked about a lot on the podcast. It's like, you know, the John friend was the big one that I remember. That really more affected my friend base, because I had so many Anusara certified friends back in LA, and it's just like, that's what's hard when you put all of your eggs in one basket. You know, just as we do business, it's like anything. You want to have more than one client base. Like, just in case, you gotta be mindful. But you know, it's hard because yoga is that line between being a business and spiritual development.
Spiritual development.
It's a very weird place to be sometimes.
It is. And you know, a lot of when we were talking earlier, I said, you know, there's a lot of teachers talking about teaching from the roots of yoga and the colonization of yoga and the appropriation of yoga within the West. You know, I still think, I never hear them say that the real problem is that when, you know, Yogananda and Swami Vivekananda brought yoga to America, yoga met capitalism. Right. And that's the problem. You know, that's really your problem. And even when those teachers came over here, you know, they, you know, the idea of, oh, yoga's just free and nobody pays for yoga. Those men courted the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the JP Morgans of America. They did not go out and teach yoga free in the park. They were looking to build ashrams and start conscious communities, and they knew that, you know, in the Indian tradition, money is only Shakti, it's only energy.
Right.
Money is worshipped. The goddess Lakshmi is wealth. Sure. So, you know, obtaining wealth is not bad. It's the attachment to wealth. So, and when you go out to LA and you go to Yogananda's, I mean, he bought some nice real estate.
Oh,
There's some nice pieces of real estate that guy picked.
right.
So
Although probably like it was a set. The
yeah,
one in the Palisades, right? It was an old set,
yeah,
which I still love. Like it's
yeah.
beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so but he was courting the elite of Hollywood.
Right.
He was not. So we learned from those lineages. We learned from those lineages. And what those lineages really set up was ashrams and learning centers that made made white people feel comfortable. They were slight spa treatments.
Right.
They were not harsh, sleep on the floor, renunciate ashrams.
Right.
They
Right.
were beautiful interiors and beautiful environments and music and all of the beauty that India offered. And Americans associate yoga with that sense of higher aesthetics.
Right. Yeah.
And that's so when you're a yoga studio and you open your doors, I try to make sure that the people who come through my door, that I call them students. I try not to call them clients, because that word client plays into that experience that it's a spa.
Right.
But, my big joke about owning a yoga studio, I've always been very good with money, handling other people's money as a designer. If you would have told me that I would spend $100 a month on toilet paper, $1,200 a year buying toilet paper, I would have said, I can't be that much.
Yeah.
But in reality, that's what it is. There's a hidden cost to running a studio. And, and these are elements that people expect you to have. And so yoga meets that expectation of capitalism.
Right.
And it's something that we have to, I think it's something that we have to kind of make peace with in the West, because nobody is going to go and practice yoga on a dirt floor in a cow dung hut. Right. It's just not going to happen. So they're expecting nice environments, clean floors, nice people at the front desk. I mean, how many bad Yelp reviews have you ever read about your desk staff like being mean?
Right. Sure.
And if you want nicer desk staff, that means the studio has to pay better.
Right. Yeah.
Your cranky desk staff are the ones who are doing your karma yoga.
Right. Yeah, pretty much. And how many times are students then taken advantage of as well by studio owners who is like, oh, I'll do it for free. I'll do this. And it's difficult because you see the pay for yoga teachers drop. I noticed a big difference from where it was in Los Angeles, and then it's like, you want me to teach a class for how much? What?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that became a little more common. Or the teacher who's been studying for a while who, doesn't feel comfortable about charging what they're worth for a private either. Like it plays out in so many different expressions.
Yeah. So we have to, one, in the yoga tradition, like I said, go back to the idea, money is Shakti. Money is just energy. Money is gas in your car. So we all have to have it.
Right.
It's like I said, I think it's the attachment that yoga teaches you. Don't be attached to the money. Don't be attached to that. Don't think you can die and take it with you, because you're not.
Right.
Or don't have a lack of graciousness with it. Be able to share wealth. Be able to to hand wealth over to others so that they can experience the good things in life too. So that's another form of attachment. And with Jivamukti and us leaving, you know, you mentioned the sale of Jivamukti.
Right.
It was sold 3 years ago. When it was sold, you know, I was very happy for David and Sharon. I love them very much. And I believe because they were an American method of yoga and it was created in a capitalistic environment, that they have every right to sell what they created.
Right.
And I thought, well, you know, let's just sit back for a few minutes and don't react and see how this works out. But when Sharon offered me the franchise, the year I did the 300-hour teacher training, they eliminated franchising fees, because what Jivamukti had realized was that their franchising fees had kept their teachers from opening up studios. That it wasn't, that, you know, it was not Bikram yoga where you were dealing with kind of celebrities. Jivamukti, you were over here dealing with a bunch of vegan tree huggers, and they didn't have no money anyway.
Right.
They didn't have any money.
Yeah.
So, you know, you would have been better off saying, no, we will be happy to give you the name as long as you deliver our message.
Right.
So that's what they did when I did the 300-hour teacher training. And I was pretty boisterous when they sold it. I said to the new owners, I said, I will support you as long as I never get a bill for a franchising fee.
Right.
And so along comes 2020.
Yeah. Well, can I ask who bought it, or?
Sure. A gentleman named Hari bought it, and
Okay.
I'm blanking out on Hari's last name. And he was had known David and Sharon for many years from Ananda Ashram.
Okay.
And he was a devotee of Sri Brahmananda Saraswati's. So he was a friend of theirs. And the other person who bought the method or the intellectual teaching component of it is a Jivamukti teacher in Norway named Camilla Venn.
Okay.
And so so Hari had bought the name and the New York City school, and Camilla bought the intellectual teacher training component.
Got
In
it.
a weird way, they're like, you know, one can't be separated from the other, really.
Right.
So there's two partners. There's an American partner and there's a Norwegian partner.
Got it. Got it.
I think with the brand itself, it started looking toward Europe as a place to grow.
Yeah.
Instead of because I think there was challenges within America that they didn't know how to address, you know? And it's so interesting because being in theater, I've dealt with so many New York producers and New York creators who become very New York centric. And in the end, they kind of, they actually jeopardize their own creativity and development by being so New York centric.
Got it.
I've done that, and there's been several big entertainment things that I was involved with that they just couldn't ever get over the idea that they were created in New York City.
Right, right.
You know, and take it out to the middle of the country, which is nothing like New York City.
Right. Sure.
You know, and when you're a successful developer of any kind of brand in America, you're able actually to speak to the middle of the country. That's success. That's the capitalistic success in this country. It's not speaking to either coast.
Got it.
It's really learning how to speak to Chicago,
right,
to Kansas, to Des Moines. If you can speak to them, you'll be very successful.
Right, right.
So the brand started looking toward Europe, and you know, New York City was changing. There was a time when, you know, Jivamukti and its cafe, its vegan cafe, was only one or two games in town.
Right.
Like, and you're talking New York City, there were no vegan restaurants.
Yeah.
There
No,
were
there
a
were
couple
like
of
a
vegan
handful. Right.
handful, and they were nowhere near each other. So there was one like all the way up on 108th Street and the West Side, and
Right.
well, at some point there was something that switched, and I'm not sure what it was, but it's been the last 8 years that everything from you know from general foods to craft, they realized that there was a whole plant-based market out there, and they started pushing this idea, and then all of a sudden there was like vegan options in restaurants all over Manhattan.
Right. Right.
And it was, I mean, it was great, it was exciting. All of a sudden you could go anywhere and eat.
Imagine that.
And
right.
yeah, but I also think that what happened is when Jivamukti started in '83, they had their finger on the pulse of being cutting edge,
Right.
and then over time, that they didn't have their finger on the pulse of youth and what was going on. That's the second component of being successful in the capitalist market. Know the changing consumer.
Right. Right.
So I think that the answer was, let's look to Europe, where everything is about 10 to 15 years behind what's happening in America in yoga. And
But
it's
not the vegan movement necessarily.
No, the vegan thing's very well. It's much more cutting edge over in Europe and in Germany and in France.
I mean, we're lagging.
But the yoga was kind of lacking over there. The exciting yoga classes, I think that yoga was still kind of treated as this old lady kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the reference, but I mean, we had like a boom definitely on the West Coast, and it started to become this, core power yoga, very physical, lots of yoga studios, on every corner.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and that's the thing. In Europe, it's not saturated. The market is just not saturated.
Got it.
You go to it's even in Jersey City. We opened up 7 years ago, and we were one of 2 yoga studios in Jersey City. Today, there are 9 yoga studios in the downtown area where I am.
Wow.
In a 4-block area.
Wow. 9.
So we opened up, and they were like mushrooms, just springing up.
Right. Right.
And that's part of the capitalist market too.
Right. Although all of that is changing too now.
With this virus, it's all changing.
Yep.
It's a little bit of a reset. So just when we got the franchising fee, because of this thing of that, we went from 2 yoga studios in town to 9 in the downtown area. The competition was like being in New York City, in Jersey City, sleepy Jersey City.
Right.
And so we were honest. We just said, this financially isn't going to work for us. We need to kind of, since you closed the New York Center, since you're so focused on Europe, we probably would be best if, for our financial benefit, if we move on. And I've only trained in the Jivamukti method. It is the method that I know and I love, and that will always kind of be there. Over time, watching what's happened in this pandemic, I feel that there's some things that yoga needs to start addressing, that the Jivamukti brand was not really great at addressing, I think. And with this new brand and new identity, I do want to take those social issues on.
Right.
I think they're all attached to how we treat animals.
Right, right.
We can, but we need to we need to, as a culture, being where we are, address race.
Yep.
We need to address gender and gender identity.
Yep. Even more now with our lovely president just undoing and pissing on everything.
Yeah. Reproductive rights.
Yep.
We need
Yep.
to address the social structure of capitalism,
Yep.
of how capitalism should work and how it should work for everybody. If it needs to be healthy, it can't only work for a few. We need to address our prison systems. We need to address trauma related from a systemic trauma to sexual trauma to all kinds of things.
Right.
And I think that as issues came up, Jivamukti it didn't have the tools to really talk about those things and address them, because it was kind of a New York centric yoga that had not embraced a lot of people of color. It tried, but it was difficult because it was so New York centric.
Okay.
Meaning that it was very easy to embrace African American celebrities,
Right.
but because it was in the Union Square and it had that world attached to it of
Right.
a certain environment. It was very hard to move it into Newark, New Jersey.
Right. Right. Yes. I mean, they're dealing with the clients at hand or the students at hand, however you want to phrase that. And plus, I mean, we're all collectively, hopefully, there's this consciousness that's brewing, right? Yeah. Essentially, most of the world has been stuck at home to think about what you've done. It's like, could have been. We've all been sent to our rooms. Like, what the hell did you do? Like, look at what's going on. And every day, at least from the perspective of an American, it's getting crazier. Like,
yes,
it just nothing surprises me anymore.
You're not when you're not shocked anymore. That's when you should worry.
Right, but at the same time, there's there are so many people desperately need yoga right now.
Yes.
Or in whatever form that looks like. It doesn't mean you have to be doing the asana, the physical postures. It's not always about that. There's so many branches of yoga that most people who are introduced to yoga, at least in the perspective of the West, don't even know.
Yes, absolutely.
And so there is this opportunity to kind of bestow the magic of yoga that has been kind of quieted towards the bottom. Like, it's been kind of pushed down because it doesn't always sell as well. Or like, you look at allo yoga, where are you going to necessarily see those elements? Not to say that some of the allo moves teachers aren't going to draw upon them. It's not a dig, but just when you're looking at just from a marketing visual perspective, and while we've seen everything shift as far as going away from the Lululemons that once only came up to a certain size, right? So we're seeing a shift in awareness that has been embraced by the yoga community and marketing, because that's where it's coming from a lot of times. So I think there's huge opportunity for people to be open to learning right now. And I agree with you. I think there is a call to yoga teachers to kind of step it up to a certain degree and start sharing deeper parts of the practice in ways that they can. Because for me as a teacher who teaches in a hot yoga class, I teach with a hot yoga class with a mirror. Like, does it get more, but I use that as an opportunity because I'm dealing with people they're really looking at shapes and they're judging themselves and they're looking straight. And I'm like, okay, we've been practicing without the lights on. Yeah. That's the best thing I can do at this point is just turn the lights off.
Yeah.
and try to keep explaining what a drishti is.
Yeah.
Where is this internal focus? Why are we going there? Like,
Yeah.
at appropriate times that will work within the students that I have the pleasure of seeing.
Yeah. And I think also as Americans, we have to address why we're so attracted. I mean, because like you just said, the yoga tradition and what is yoga is vast. It is vast.
Right,
Everything from bhakti yoga to jnana yoga to raja yoga to karma yoga to hatha yoga to, tantric yoga, japa yoga. I mean, this keeps going on and on and on.
Right.
What is yoga?
And most people don't know it.
Well, they never even heard of it.
Right.
But why are Americans so attracted to asana? Like, why do we love asana? Because asana is not the most popular form of yoga in India. It's just not.
Right.
It's because we're so literal. Americans are very literal. They have to feel something immediately. And asana allows you to feel it immediately in your body. And you actually can click into the metaphor within the physical body. It's very tantric. Tantra is all practices that are about the body. That's why we love it so much. So it's a good tool to teach people and raise consciousness if you're willing to, as a yoga teacher, say things at the right time and in the right way.
Yeah.
That trigger the psyche while somebody's in a stressed position. It's tantric. Remember, it's all kind of tricking the mind and experiencing the senses. And we this month on the exploration, the Urban Sadhu exploration, I had a student reach out to me because I must have said something in a virtual class about politics, and the student who was watching online reached out and said, "I don't think this is the place for politics." And I actually wrote her back a lovely letter saying, actually, yoga is nothing but about politics. Yoga, everything in yoga is about politics. From Patanjali giving you the yamas: non-harming, non-stealing, non-lying, restricting or stopping your sexual energy completely,
right,
to non-greed. These are all 5 components that are to make you a better person, so you are a better person within society. That's his first step. Right. Become a better person in society. If you are a better person in society, that your society will reflect it. Therefore, it is politics. The Ramayana.
Yeah.
I mean, it's politics.
Right,
the Ramayana, the teachings of Lord Ram, most yogis know it because they love Hanumanasana, right. Hanuman, the monkey deity who is the devotee to Ram. Ram's story is about how a prince is going to handle himself within the political arena, first with his king, the father, and then after the father dies, with the people who are gossiping about his wife, Sita. How is he going to deal and talk to his subjects? And it's a bittersweet tale. It's not a fairy tale. I mean, Ram actually has a very unhappy life as a politician, as a king. Then you have the Bhagavad Gita, which is set in front of the backdrop of a civil war. How political can you get?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And Krishna is teaching Arjuna of...
I lost you for a moment.
Oh, you there?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. All right, say it again. The Bhagavad Gita they're teaching.
So you have the Bhagavad Gita in front of the backdrop of a civil war.
Right.
And Krishna, while in the chariot about to go into battle, when Arjuna has this breakdown, this nervous breakdown, you have him saying to him, calm your mind. I'm going to first tell you what your cousins did. I'm going to remind you. Then I'm going to teach you yoga and then explain to you why you have to fight this battle. All about politics. Who has the moral compass of leadership? The Pandavas or the Kauravas?
Right.
So, and it's morality, it's dharma. You know, your teacher takes on that name dharma. What is dharma?
Right.
Dharma is that universal righteous law.
Yep.
We all have to adhere by.
Right.
Our duty. So yoga is politics, unfortunately, and it meant capitalism. That's why the politics was cut out of yoga, because it meant capitalism.
That makes sense.
Because
I mean, it's a different conversation that I've heard in yoga, but it makes sense, and especially, I mean, everything's just being so illuminated for us right now.
Yeah. Well, you know, the idea that you know, that when we talk about, because let's get back to, you know, the purpose of the podcast, you know, animals and veganism.
Right.
You know, that is right now in our situation, that is one of the most political statements you can make.
Right.
When you embrace veganism, you know, you are actually rejecting the social norm that you were raised in.
Yeah.
You are saying that there's something wrong with the dharma that you've been living.
Right.
So this goes back to the new name, Urban Sadhu. So urban city dweller, but a sadhu is a holy person who's a slight renunciate. They've given up something. You've given up these social identities. You don't have to give up your home. You don't have to go and live in a cave. You're actually saying, I'm not going to participate on society in society the way that society has told me I have to participate.
Right.
I'm rejecting that. I'm renouncing that. So veganism is still a huge part of this, because veganism is the way into many of the other spiritual teachings.
Right. And they're common. It's a common thread of what we do unto other just beings in general, how we interact, what we use them for. You know, all of these themes are important, and having restraint from just doing what you want, instant gratification, so that you can have that momentary pause and, you know, thought of what to do next. You know, and I think it's a great area to be in, because you're just not participating in spreading future pandemics like the bird flu. Like, you know, it's like we're making choices. We're helping the environment, which desperately needs our help as well.
Absolutely. And most of the environmental problems you're talking about come from animal agriculture.
Right.
From animal waste being put into the ground sources and water systems.
Right.
You know, and raising consciousness is also that understanding that what a yogi maybe did 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, may not be your dharma now.
Right. Well, I love bringing that up, because somebody will say, well, you know, there was ghee.
Yes, there is.
Of course there is. But we were also, you know, flushing our bodies out from, you know, nasal cavity to anus with like a long piece of cloth, which most people aren't doing on a regular basis. Like,
it's fabulous.
There's some different practices that we've ditched, or
you should try it.
yeah. There's this one with like the holding of the semen. Like, there's some bizarre stuff in some of these older texts that we're not utilizing. Like, you just look at it and go, okay, well, that's weird, but it's not relevant for the time. But the teaching in general is relevant. The main idea is the same. It's just the expression that we need to use going forward is different, I think.
And we have to, you know, to be just very hardcore and honest about it. You know, 5,000 years ago, cows were not locked up into little pens, living in their poo.
Right.
They had a relationship with a human I mean, I'm not going to condone animal husbandry and herding, because to romanticize it, we get into the problem of it in the first place.
Well,
but
yeah,
the
and
industrial
then people will say, oh, well, then I just do an ahimsa farm, just like you'll hear, oh, I only get the grass fed. Yeah, it just doesn't, it's not sustainable and it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work because it just isn't working in this time. So this is when we look at the teachings of yoga, the teachings that Patanjali gave you, the teachings that Lord Ram gave you, the teachings of Krishna, they all three are very different in their yuga, in their time frame. None of them are doing the same thing. Patanjali gives you a very simple five things to do externally in these yamas.
Right.
Ram is following the rules of society to try to make it work. Krishna is breaking every rule of society. He is going against society to try to achieve dharma. So that in itself says that whatever your yuga is, whatever time frame you're in, you can't live by somebody else's dharma. You have to figure out the rules in your society. And right now, with animal agriculture and the way that it's being done, you cannot embrace animal agriculture, be part of the system of capitalism, buying those goods, and then claim to be a yogi. It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's a hard line to draw, and one that I've tried to consciously not point fingers at.
Well, I don't want to
I want an open door for people to always come in, and I want an open door. It's like people make mistakes. People fall off track. Like, I'm sure there's so many people right now during the pandemic. I've talked to friends who were like vegan, and then like mozzarella cheese happened. Like I was doing, and I'm like, whoa, what, and it's one thing, like it's one thing that sometimes gets to me with some of the Dharma, at least the way I hear about it. Like, he's had moments where he's been so rigid and something happened. And then there's that ability to go, okay, this happened, find the love in yourself and the forgiveness in yourself to move forward again. Yeah. But it doesn't mean, and I think sometimes it is interpreted as, is keep allowing those slip ups. It's not about that. It's about being okay with sometimes you fall off track for whatever reason, whatever you're dealing with, and you can use that as an opportunity to learn from it.
Right.
And then to course correct.
Right.
But I, so I always want to be in that loving space for somebody who's off path, who wants to get back on path.
Right. There's in the Buddhist tradition, there's two stories of the death of the Buddha. Do you know these two different stories?
Well, I've heard one that he had like chicken or meat or something because he didn't want to be rude. This was the example that was used in my first teacher training, because I was being a little made fun of for going vegetarian for this training. I just did it out of nowhere, and they were like, "Oh, that's silly. Even the Buddha ate chicken," and went on. And I heard the moral of the story differently. I was like, "So, what you're saying is the chicken killed him?" I was like, "Wait a minute."
Right. Well,
but go ahead. Tell me the other story. I don't know.
And so you're right. In the North China and those places, North India, the Buddhist story is that he ate meat from a very poor person who offered him meat, but the meat had been rancid, and he knew that he was so sick and elderly that at that point it would probably kill him to get some kind of botulism or something like that. And he ate it anyway out of compassion for the person, to not insult them. But in the South, or like in South India and even Siam at the time, the story was that he was given poison mushrooms because within those cultures, they were already very highly vegetarian anyway. So the mushrooms were poisonous, and he knew that he was going to die by eating mushrooms that this person had picked, that they didn't know that they were toxic. Either way, there's that idea of compassion and being able to leave the door open. And that's why it's nice having the two stories side by side. I think that, though, what we have to do in our modern times with some of the issues that we're talking about, I'm a big fan of Will Tuttle's book,
World Peace Diet.
World Peace Diet. And what I really opened my eyes was his talking about anthropology and the idea that once Middle Eastern cultures were able to herd sheep, that all of a sudden you had land ownership happening, you had the subjugation of women and children, you had the domination of money and capitalism, and very close behind was the enslavement of humans. And he takes all this back to, and he has all the footnotes of, to actually study this deeper of how that our relationship with animals triggered our inhumanity to each other. And that's where we are, I think, right now in our Dharma. In modern times, it's not a discussion about that we've been having. Is it a diet, or is it chic, or is it this, or is it that? Is it elitist? If we want to stop the systemic abuse of other humans, we have to look at our relationship to animals.
Yeah.
And your ahimsa milk is still a slave.
Right.
That cow doesn't have a voice. It doesn't have a vote. It doesn't have the ability to say, I don't feel like working today.
Right.
And that's the truth. So it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
The ahimsa milk doesn't, the grass-fed beef doesn't work because the cow doesn't say, I'm not ready to go yet. I'm not ready to die.
Right.
I don't feel like giving you my flesh today.
So at what point, as teachers, how do you communicate that to a student? Like, at what point do you communicate that with your students? Always? Sometimes? Lightly? Always?
And maybe that's just that's something that's the part of me that the Sharon Gannon influence is just never going to leave. I'm not going to be apologetic about that.
Right.
Because I really do believe that if we want to change this social structure that we have, even within what we're seeing right now, a president who would take his mask off and go into the White House where Black and brown bodies work as people who care for him and be so unconcerned.
Yeah.
I mean, it's infuriating.
Right.
And it can directly be traced back to how he eats.
Oh, absolutely.
How he sees food.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No.
And you have to point that out to people.
So do you come up against, at this point, when people come into your studio, are people surprised by that? Do they know what they're getting? Do you come up against that as being somebody being upset or offended? What has it been like on your end of being that forthcoming about veganism and either pushback or the embracing of your students? What has that been like?
When I have a student, normally what happens is because Jivamukti was so popular for so long, they knew what they were getting into, most of them.
Right.
But every once in a while, you had somebody who didn't know what they were getting into. And they would, come up and they would want to tell me, how they felt. And what I do then is I listen. I do listen. Yeah. And I usually like to tell that story about the Buddha, both stories. And I'm clear. I say, if I go home for Christmas, I'm not going to hurt my grandmother's feelings. I can say to her, Grandma, I can't eat the ham. I'm not going to eat the ham. But it is harder to tell Grandma I can't have a piece of her cake. That's a harder issue, and she may not understand. So you do have to be compassionate, and you have to make decisions in certain social situations that are appropriate.
Right.
However, when you are in control of yourself, remember, yoga is about the self, then you need to be making higher conscious decisions. You need to make decisions that are going to actually reflect the kind of world you want to create.
Right. And I think that's an important lesson for just the vegan community to hear, because what we see often in the vegan communities online, and almost everybody is just talking to themselves virtually anymore, is you see that moment where somebody goes, well, I had a piece of cake because of my grandmother or whatever, and then the hatred that comes at them.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain degree, well, I am in the situation where I can always, unless there's something that has slipped into my food that I don't know about, be in control of making those decisions. That's just the way my life is now.
Yes.
But I don't think it serves, that's where it becomes tricky. I don't think it serves the vegan community to turn somebody off from veganism. Like, look at the long game here. But at the same time, how as yoga teachers do you push that element onto somebody? Like, they're kind of opposing thoughts at the same time. It's like, well, be kinder or more compassionate to somebody, or have a moment where you may have to interact with your grandmother differently, but at the same time, as a yoga teacher, keep that message clear. And that's tricky to navigate, I think.
I think it is too, but I think that the key is right now where we are as an American culture, speaking about the political issues we're talking about. I think to stand in front of a class and be able to draw a direct point to, I can control a cow's reproductive cycle,
right,
by letting her mate when I say she can mate, and a discussion that is going to happen at the Supreme Court level. And when you draw those two conclusions, see, I'm not hopeful that everybody's going to in the world is going to be vegan. Right. I think some of my vegan brothers and sisters, they want to make the whole world vegan. I think that is a long shot.
Right.
I want to see the system disrupted. I want to see the system of capitalism disrupted. I want to see that I want people to be aware that when they walk into a grocery store, what they are buying, why they are buying it, and how it got there.
Yeah.
And then you can make your decision.
Right.
But I feel bad when you make a decision out of ignorance.
Right.
Because you don't know how it got there. You don't know what it went through. You have no understanding. I feel the same way when we talk about African Americans and the horrible historical existence that white America has actually put African Americans in. But we also have to make a direct point to point of Southern slave owners and the discussion and the language they used with African bodies about beast animals, of using domestic animals and slave cabins near each other as psychological abuse against Africans to make them feel like animals. And we have the language, we have the historical language. All you have to do is look at the records of Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. The language is there. There is a psychological warfare going on, directly connecting animal agriculture to enslavement of human bodies. The
Yeah.
same thing with the American Indians, First Nations peoples. Whites use that same idea of herding, controlling mentality,
Right.
of getting the herd together and moving the herd that we do with animals.
Yeah.
These are hard, difficult subjects, but they're issues that they're discussions we're going to have.
Yeah.
And once you get the the minorities to start seeing how that every time they buy into the animal agro system, that they are supporting the foundations of suppression. If
Yeah.
you can
That's a lot.
turn that over,
Yeah. That crossover is hard.
if you can flip that even to a 50-50%,
Yeah.
you are going to disrupt the system.
Right.
You're going to dismantle the system, and then it opens the door to really dealing with some political issues and globally. But right, like I said at the beginning, I know that there are horrible things happening all over the world,
Right.
but I'm an American. I really have only experienced these things within my own culture.
Right. Right.
You know.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the world, it's interesting. We're gonna have to kind of land it in a minute, but I was talking to a couple friends, couple times, and I've had another friend have something similar in Europe, where I'll talk to him about, well, what is your opinion of what's going on over here? Like, do you guys laugh at us, cry? Like, what is your reaction? And what I keep hearing is, well, I think we're all waiting to see, like, what you guys are going to do and how we're going to get through this. And I said, well, maybe you shouldn't be looking at us anymore, because we clearly don't know what the hell's going on.
Right.
But it
Right.
is curious to see that there is that looking towards, America. And I always look at it as, oh, it's the Americans. They think they're just the shit because we're self-centered. But it is an interesting place to be right now. But the system has to fall before you can build it up. And I think right now we're just in the middle of watching everything kind of crumble.
Yeah.
Slowly.
My feeling about America historically from its very beginnings, it comes out of the foundations of government comes out of the age of enlightenment. While those people did not get everything right, they were asking some very hard intellectual questions, and they were thinking some old medieval systems that had been put in place in Europe. America is still the greatest social experiment in the world. It has not always been successful.
Yeah.
It has not. But the interesting thing is even when your European friends say to you, we are watching to see what you do, they're saying that because it's a social experiment. It has always been a social experiment from this 18th century. When the King of France actually backed the revolutionaries, which also put him in a terrible position during the French Revolution. Like, how can you support these freedom fighters over in America, and here you are, the King of France? So we should keep evolving. We should be the leadership in evolving in these issues, and because we're an experiment, we're a laboratory.
Okay.
The rest of the world is not a laboratory. It wasn't set up as a laboratory. And once, I think a lot of times people forget that America has been set up to ask these very difficult questions, for us to actually disagree with each other, strongly, that we have the right to disagree with each other. We have forgotten that. We think that everybody has to agree with each other. We don't have to agree with each other. We can't kill each other. We can't have militias come in, but we can disagree with each other. It's okay if we disagree with each other. It's good that we disagree with each other. It's good that we have open dialogues. Without open dialogues, the experiment can't happen. So I also think that part of this experiment is, the idea of food, and how food is, needs to be broken down within capitalism.
Yeah.
because the here again, it's food is very much like yoga. Food should be very intimate with you, and instead what you have is a capitalist system that's made it very, very impersonal.
Right. Right. I could talk to you forever. I know people listening go, please don't. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my God, he won't shut up.
No. You know what? This is just the way it always goes.
Yeah.
So Urban Sadhu Yoga Shala, that is the new umbrella of yoga that you are presenting to the world.
And we'll be trying to branch out.
Yeah.
Because I think there's space for what we do out there in the world, and there's some things that we've actually patented that are new within the yoga world. I know that sounds like that's impossible, but really it was more like some of the things that we patented were how to run a better studio instead of another yoga method.
Right.
How to present this material to the world and on a management level, instead of like, we have a new way of doing downward facing dog.
Right. What so your studio is in New Jersey. It's
Jersey
at the
City.
Same location. Yes.
Same location.
Okay.
171 Newark Avenue. We also have a virtual component. You can go to our website, urbansadhuyoga.com, and you can sign up for virtual classes. And those are live stream. And then we have I don't know if we do have a site where there's archival streamed classes.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's changed over from Jivamukti Yoga Live yet to our US Yoga Live.
Okay, we'll put all of that in the show notes.
Yeah, so there's ways to get to us.
Yeah.
To see what we're doing, what we're saying, what's happening, even if you're not here in New Jersey.
Excellent. Even if you're not an American.
And even if you're not an American, that's right. It's global now. I mean, it's like this is the global moment for the global satsang.
Yeah. What so you have physical classes? Do you have? I mean, it's so hard to plan anything at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have plans for trainings to go forward or workshops that you?
We will be. Yes, I'm writing a 300-hour teacher training now. I've also written up a mentorship program that would be able to actually bring people in outside of either Jivamukti or Urban Sadhu and coach them to be better teachers.
That's cool.
So that idea that you said, we hear so much, I did a 200-hour teacher training, like you said, and I wasn't prepared to teach.
Right.
The only way you can really do that is a mentorship, but we can't really start that program until this pandemic, this virus is gone.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that under this new brand, we will be doing certain things like trauma sensitive yoga. Yoga, outreach. I have many friends who work in those community situations that they would love to have a 75-hour teacher training, dealing with a certain population of the community, whether it's transgender or it's African American, and dealing specifically with that trauma.
Yeah.
And so that we would be doing teacher trainings to help people that want to go out and be, spiritual activists.
Yeah.
Then can have the tools to do that.
Right.
So that's important to us too, is because a lot of those things that outreach, a lot of that type of outreach cannot be done in the studio system. It just can't. it's a different kind of yoga. It's a different type of yoga.
Yeah.
Mainly because a lot of that population feels very conscious about coming into the studio environments.
Right, right.
And once you get them comfortable, then they can on their own walk up those stairs. Like you said, we said in the beginning, you have to meet people where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whether it's with the idea of veganism or if it's the idea of the satsang of a studio.
This was a beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much.
I knew it was going to be good. I didn't know it was going to be this good, but I appreciate it so much, and your insight and your wisdom, and I love what you're doing and how you're sharing. And I just wish you the most success, and hopefully we'll have, more of these to come.
Yeah, let's plan some. I think it would be really interesting to do one on textiles.
Yes,
fascinating. And I would love to do like something about the history of food and from India.
Yeah.
And the idea of food and yoga and Sanatana Dharma and how it comes to us and where we are now. I'd love to do something like that, because I think that's also one of those kind of things that we make assumptions, and those assumptions are always not right, historically. And I think knowing the historical information is always interesting. You can't live your life historically, but you should. I think it was Cicero who once said, if you don't know what happened before your birth, you will always be a child.
Okay. All right. I like that. Let's see. All right. Your website is urbansadhuyoga.com.
urbansadhuyoga.com.
And you're on social, or is it Urban Sadhu?
I'm Urban Sadhu. That's my purpose, my personal link. And then the studio is Urban Sadhu Yoga, I think. It may be Jersey City, but I can't remember if the Instagram account.
Okay.
I think the Facebook is Urban Sadhu Yoga.
Great.
So it's but if you find me personally on this Urban Sadhu on Instagram, you'll be able to kind of link up with everything else.
Perfect.
But I tell you, changing all that stuff over in social media the past 5 or 6 days has been a nightmare.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm unsure about some of it.
That's okay. We'll all get it sorted out. It'll all be on the show notes as well. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. And have a beautiful day, and come down and visit us.
I definitely will. We're not that far.